Hey everybody, welcome to part 3 of the alt logic project that we're doing. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the interface and some of the tool options we have for logic. So I want to go through a lot of what to expect where and what each of these things are. I know that when you're first using logic, this can be a little bit complicated, but also for those of you who may have been using this for a long time, I think that there are still some things that is good to review and good to understand what you may or may not have used. So we have this whole interface right now. This is called the main window, and we have a number of different components, and these are typically made visible or hidden along the control bar at the top, and we can actually customize that. We'll look at that in a little bit. So this is the control bar at the top. Down here along the side, we have our library, which is where we can find a lot of the presets and instruments that come with Logic. We have our inspector, which gives us more information about things that are in here and tells us a lot of information about our tracks. It has a little mini mixer as well. Then we have on the right side a notepad, and this can be a project notepad or a track notepad, which means we can take notes per individual track. We have our loop library, and then we also have our browsers, our media browsers, etc. Now, with this, we have one more area that shows up down at the bottom. We have our smart controls. This gives us access to a number of different parameters that change on a track-by-track basis. We have a mixer we can pop up here, and then we have our editor view, which shows up a number of different editors. Now you might be wondering why we're missing a few of the buttons if it looks different than yours, and that's because we have the basic view turned on and we don't have the full view turned on, which is what comes more with the advanced area. But I do want to look real quickly before we turn that on. We have our main workspace right here. This is where all of our audio and MIDI regions go, where we can do a lot with automation, etc. So our main primary workspace is down in this big empty space right now. So let's come in and actually turn on the advanced tools. And just by showing advanced tools, you'll see a few different things pop up. We have one right here which shows the toolbar, which we're going to look at in just a second. We have our list view over here. Right here, this is our list editor. And so those are the main things across the actual control bar that popped up. Let's just enable everything right now. I do recommend for first-time users to stick with the advanced tools not shown and not turned on. Just because it does simplify things. But I want to go through now each of these areas and explain a few things, key concepts, which are really important. So first and foremost, if your control bar looks different than mine, there's a little arrow we can click on, and we can actually change what's visible. So we have beats and project. Beats is a really standard way to operate in terms of our transport here to look at that, because Logic is so good at working with things that have tempos and work inside time signatures, and so that will show us that information. We have the large option, which has a little bit more information, but we have the ability to put a timer or the time function here as well, so you can see how many hours, minutes, and seconds, plus a large version of that. Just beats, just time, and custom. Custom adds a whole bunch of stuff. And in fact, we can right-click off to one of the sides here in the empty gray space and customize the control bar and the display area. And then you'll see just kind of what everybody is thinking here in terms of the organization. We have our view options, our transport options, our LCD options, and then our modes and functions. And so this is super handy to be able to customize this. So with our transport, you'll see tons of additional options. The only one that I typically use in addition to these would be the capture recording. This is a more advanced topic, so look for us to cover it down the road. But it looks like that with the red with the little white line around it. Otherwise, I don't do too much with the actual transport up here. I do most of it with my mouse and keyboard shortcuts. Okay, so the LCD, we can, if we're in one of these other modes, you'll see it gets grayed out. But if it's under custom, we can actually change this. I will often put sample rate on here. That way I can actually ensure the sample rate is what I want it to be. This has become more important now that I'm doing a lot of things on Zoom, the online communication tool. It requires 48 kilohertz sampling rate, so I do that. Varispeed sometimes is nice. I can change the entire project speed if I'm testing out different tempos. And then if I wanted to, I can put the key signature. I don't usually do a ton with that there as well. You can see MIDI activity in and out. I like having that visible. Performance meters, this is one of the only ways to get to those. So we have those turned on. And then modes and functions. These all depend on how you're working. For instance, when you're recording with a big project, I often will have low latency mode on or as an option here so I can turn it on easily. That's super handy, so you can record with low latency, then turn it right back off to be able to continue working on the effects. If you're doing things with picture or external gear, you need to sync it. You can turn on the sync button, but you can now see all the different options here. You can go through and customize this however you want. Now, the control bar here, super handy. If we expand this down, this is the toolbar. So control bar is the top row. This is the toolbar. And we can also customize the toolbar and do things here. So for instance, I can put a bounce function so we can bounce things down, or export function. We can import audio, but I just usually drag and drop anyway. I do like the groups clutch sometimes. That means I can turn off groups temporarily. So that's kind of nice. We have automation quick access popping up. But you'll see that now we've gone off the edge of the screen. And so really, at some point, we'd want to simplify what we have here so that we don't necessarily have it all. So for instance, I don't think I need zoom, set locators. I mean, insert silence is fine. Cut section, repeat section, nudge value. If you're doing a lot with key commands, then a lot of this you can set with key commands anyway. So I don't know how great that's going to be in most cases. Stretch to locators is an interesting tool. There's a lot. So you can do a lot here. You can customize it just how you want it. And that becomes really useful. It does take up some screen real estate. So of course you can hide it either by clicking on that. You can actually drag it if you want up and down. So you can do it that way too. Most of my tutorials, you'll see this is not turned on. And that's because I don't do a ton with it, but I know where it is, and there's a few things I'd like to do with it in there, like note repeat or spot erase. So, I mean, there are some things that I've used that for. Okay, all of that is fine and good. Next, we have the library. This is where we go through all of the stuff that we can use from Logic's point of view. There's one thing I want to teach you right off the bat, which is really handy for this type of situation. I'm going to reset this channel strip that we have. So I clicked on setting and just reset it. So now it's an empty channel strip. And you can come through here and save channel strip setting as once it's empty. And we can call this our default, right? Now I've already got a default on here, so I'm not going to save it, but I would just call it default. And then over here on my library, I'm going to click where it says User Channel Strip Settings. I've got the default patch, but I'm going to right click on it and define as default. And the reason why I'm going to do that is so that anytime I just pop up a new track, it will load up with the default and then it'll be empty. There's a lot of reasons why this is handy. One of them is then you can load in any instrument you want. It also prevents sends from being initiated. So it'll, by default, put bus 3 and bus 4. And then those will have mixer channels as well. So that's when the first thing opened up in this project. It created those two channels for me without even telling me what it was doing. And so I don't like it to create all this extra routing and put extra effects that I'm not going to be using. So I want it to just populate with a default track. Now, the other step with this that becomes so important, when you do a new project, let's close this, don't save. When you pop down the details there, it'll say, what do you want to have it created first? You can actually do an empty one or just the default patch. I'm just going to do the default patch, and you'll see that that empty one that I just created, defined as the default, popped right up. Now, if you always want a certain thing to load up every single time, then this is a way to do that as well. So for instance, if I were to bring out sampler and choose from the sampler patch anything I wanted, like a piano sound, for instance, we could load that up in here. So we could do electric piano. We could also do acoustic piano. Let's do Steinway piano 2. Let's turn on my keyboard so I can see if I'm hearing this. Right? So I could load that up if I wanted to, and we could just make this a whole fancy thing under my inspector. Choose a piano icon to make it look pretty. And then we come to setting, we say save channel strip as, and I save this as the piano starter, right? Then I come over here to all of my settings, right there, piano starter, define as default. Then anytime I create a new one out here, it's going to create that piano one. And so I can easily just, anytime I know I'm creating a new instrument track, I just want a piano to pop up first, and then I can switch it. That's perfectly fine too. So you can see how saving this as a channel strip setting, coming over here to the user created ones, right-clicking, defining as default can be really powerful. Okay. So that's part of that process. I wanted to explain that much of it. And I think there's so much more we're going to get to when we get into the library and talking about channel strips, but this is a great place to start. One thing I want to talk about with the inspector is just to give you a quick overview. There are two parts to this, and I think that can sometimes be confusing when you're first starting this and learning how to use it. For instance, if I record, right? Something simple. And now I've got two sets of settings over here. I've got what's called the region and the track. The track is going to apply to everything. So say I have two of these over here. I used Option, click, and drag to just copy that. So now I've got two of them, right? Well, if I change something here, say I transpose this in the region inspector area. The second one isn't transposed. But let's say I undid that and I come down here into the track one, which also has a transpose. I do +12. Then they're both transposed. So if you want to transpose your entire track, do it down here in this part of the inspector. If you just want to do one particular region, then do it in the top part. And I will say you can select two of them together and transpose both of them, and they both will get transposed. So I could transpose half of a track or something like that using the region transpose. So very handy to know the difference between region and track parameters inside your inspector. So those are really important to understand. Now, the thing about the workspace that I want to point out right now in this particular video is that we have a subcategory of menus. This is the workspace specific menus, and almost everything in here is going to work similar to this. So we have this set of menus, which is specific to this workspace. And we have the menus up here, which is specific to the entire program. And for instance, if we were to open up one of our editors, it has its own menus. So keep your eye out for which menus you're in and which ones you're using. They're going to be different in each of these different cases. They're going to do different things that are just specific for that. But keeping that in mind, I want you to notice around the workspace right now is a blue line, the light blue line. And we can actually click into different areas sometimes and different things will happen. So now the blue line is around this window. And let's see if we can, I don't know if it goes around this specific one here. But I can get to go back over to here. If I have an editor or the mixer up, it goes around that. Here it is around the editor. So that tells you which window is, or part of the window is in focus. And this will apply to key commands. So for instance, watch as I do command left arrow with the blue line around this, or if I do left command left arrow when that one is selected, it's not going to do things in both windows. The key commands are going to go to the specific area that's highlighted unless it's a global key command. So for instance, spacebar, no matter which one I'm in, that's going to be activating the transport. So keep that little blue line in mind as you're doing this. Another thing I want to point out from the middle here, the inspector, is that little blue arrow which is next to, right now where it says piano starter. That's the preset I created. But if I hover down here, you'll see I can choose different things for that. Right now it's just those two. Say I put on a MIDI effect, then one shows up for that, one shows up for that. So this indicates which area is going to be highlighted over here inside the library. So right now, up at that top thing, it's going to allow me to pick out channel strip settings because that's the channel strip setting area. If I come down, and now it's on the arpeggiator, which is a MIDI effect, and I now see all the presets for that. If I click down here with the sampler, it's going to let me load up sampled instruments for it. And this would change if we had other things here as well. So keep that in mind that it's easy to shift which part of the library you're looking at by just clicking and choosing the different little arrow for that. Okay, so that's good to know. One other thing then for this particular area of the workspace, if we come into Preferences and Display, then we can actually come through here and look at some of the things that we have options for this. So the white line here, that's the playhead. We can say we want a wider version of that instead of a narrow one. Matter of fact, we can actually change the large local window menus, the large inspectors, show default values, icons. So we can do all of that stuff right there. We have inside the Tracks tab, which applies more to the workspace here, we can show track or bar numbering when scrolling. So if we scroll, we can see a number on the screen. But let's do a bright background. We can even do a custom background, which is between the dark and the bright. We can do marker colors. We can change them if we want. Those markers we're going to talk about later. And then track colors, auto assign. I like auto assigning. It'll just add more color as we go down through here. And then you'll see some other display things there. We're not going to get into that yet. So I like the brighter background of your workspace. For contrast's sake, I do think it brightens up the entire program a little bit, which is kind of nice. Another thing then with our workspace, we're going to get into more of this as we talk about tempo things with snapping, dragging, zooming. All of those we'll handle in separate videos. But I do want to have you look at the tools here because this is something you'll need right off the bat. We have our main set of tools. This is the main tool when you're just moving the cursor around. This is what's going to be visible. We can change that. The second one here is when you hold down the command key on your keyboard, the tool you choose in the second one is what pops up. So for instance, we have a scissor tool here, and we could split our notes, right? Just like that. So that gives us the second tool. Now, there is, in fact, a way to add an additional tool here, and we can come through here. The right mouse button is assignable to a tool. So now we've got 3 tools that pop up. So this was in general of your preferences under editing. Right mouse button either opens the tool menu, opens the shortcut menu, opens tool and shortcut menu, or is assignable as a tool. So that gives us a third tool that we can choose from here. So for instance, if we wanted to have the pencil tool be one, the scissor tool, now I can right click to have the pencil tool, normal would be the arrow, and then the command would be the scissors. So that gives me a lot of flexibility here with the tool amounts and what they do. And that's pretty handy. The other thing that I typically do, that's not usually my first mode of operation. Usually I move my right mouse button to open tool and shortcut menu. So that way when I right click, I've got all my tools, and then I also have some menu options down below. So that gives me a little bit more right from the get-go. So instead of remembering to switch this around or assign something to that right mouse click, I can just really quickly come through here and say, you know what, I want to be able to use my pencil tool real quick. I use it, and then I switch back to the pointer tool. That's one way of doing it. So much information, and we're going to be getting more in depth with all of this. So we're going to be looking at, for instance, the library and some of the cool things that we can do in there. We're going to actually go through all the parameters in our inspector, and we're going to look at all of our channel strips and the mixer, and we're going to go through all of the different editors, and we're going to look at each of these menus or options over on the right side, the event list, the notepads, the loop browser, and the media browser. So don't worry, these are all coming in future videos, but we just can't do everything all at once. The last thing I want to point out in this particular one, learning about the interface, is that under the window menu at the top, we can open up many of these same things into their own windows. So for instance, I could open up, if I wanted to, we could do an entire mixer, and this mixer could go on a second monitor if we wanted to. It could go in different places. We can change what's viewable here. So we can add different options to this and add all of it in. And this becomes super useful. And so we can have separate things, not just the all-inclusive single main window. And then it becomes really useful because we can do this thing where now we can assign screen sets to whatever we're doing. So what we do is for screen sets, it's pretty simple. Screen sets are saved as we actually make them. So I'm going to click on number 2 on my keyboard, and let's open up that mixer again. So mixer, just like this, that's number 2. So I'm going to go back to number 1, goes back to my main window, click on number 2 again, and it remembers what I created in there. So you make your screen sets on the fly, essentially. And when we get into making a template, like a template for all your projects, we're going to look at how to save these in your template so that whenever you open up your new project that you want to work on, your screen sets will come with it. So that's something really useful. That'll be something we talk about as well in the future. But for now, anytime I want to make a new one, I just click on the number I want to assign for it. So say I want to do it like this, get rid of any excess information. Here's another really cool thing we can do. We can grab and resize a lot of these. So I'm going to resize that. I'm going to show another window here. Say I want to do the score editor. Pull this over. So this is number 3 now. Obviously, we'll resume that down. And we should probably put it into page view. Right? So we can see this as a page. Let's go back to number 1. This is my main workspace. 2, if I want to see the mixer. 3, I've got my notation and stuff set up, ready to go. And all I did, again, just to recap, was push the number I want to go to. So say I want to add something to number 7. I can rearrange this however I want. Go back to number 1, 3, 2, 7. And it's just going to keep all of that in place for where you put it. We do have some options up in this menu where it says the number, where we can duplicate, we can rename, we can delete, we can also lock or revert to saved. So we have some options with those as well. Okay, that's it for this introduction to the interface. I think we covered a lot, put some a little bit more advanced nuggets in here as well, trying to cover all the different pieces. You can see already how complicated this whole thing is going to be. There's a lot to this program. It's not simple. It's often not even logical. But there is the ability to learn where things are and how they work so you can start to master them. So this was the video all about the interface and navigating around that a little bit. In the next few videos, we're really going to start getting more specific about how to use specific features and to get everything running in terms of an actual project.